There's an old building on the east side of town, half finished, long forgotten. The kind of place kids dare each other to sneak into and grown men pretend they never visited. For me, it was once a hiding place. Now it's a gravesite. I stood there again after more than a decade, boots pressed against cracked concrete wind, clawing at my coat. The cold had teeth that morning, but I needed it to bite. I pulled out a folded sheet of paper from my pocket. On it were the last words I'd ever speak to the man I used to be. No audience, no applause. Just me and the bones of old scaffolding. This is your eulogy, I said under my breath. Not because you died, but because I finally stopped keeping you alive. That weak version of myself. He wasn't a villain. He was tired, addicted, passive. He waited for permission to feel strong. And every time life asked something of him, he flinched. I lived in his shadow longer than I should have. But I'm done with that now. I took a breath, deep and sharp, and read, "You were the version of me that always said not yet. You were the story they told myself when I didn't believe in endings. Just excuses. You wore comfort like armor and mistook safety for peace. But I see you now, and I release you." Tore the letter in half, then again, and let the pieces scatter. The wind took them without hesitation. I envy that, how easily it let go. People talk about changing your life like it's some glossy reinvention, like it's a second chance dressed up in new habits and vision boards. But real change, it's brutal. It's the funeral you never attend. You don't get closure. You bury the old version of yourself in silence. And some days you dig up the same coffin just to prove to yourself it's still shut. The Stoics knew something about that. Epictetus once said, "First say to yourself what you would be and then do what you have to do." That line hit me like a sledgehammer. Because for years I didn't know what I wanted to be. I just knew what I hated being. And now I'm drawing new lines. That morning at the construction site wasn't the beginning. It was the declaration. My real beginnings started when I left that place, not with a victory, but with a vow over the next 30 days I would kill the weak version of myself. Not out of hatred, but out of necessity. He had gotten me this far. But he couldn't take me any further, so I started making cuts. No more snoozing the alarm. Cold showers every day. No comfort food, no social media, no dopamine, quick fixes, no running from discomfort. No numbing out. Instead, I would chase discomfort, welcome it, let it shape me like wind sculpt a stone. I bought a notebook, not to write plans, but to write lies. Every time I heard that voice say, "You can't," I wrote it down. Every excuse, every doubt, every whispered limit. Then I'd cross it out, one by one, like I was slashing the tires of my old identity. I started rising at 5. I didn't care if I had nowhere to be. That wasn't the point. The point was discipline, structure, self-command. The first few days felt like fire, but somewhere around day 4, the pain got quieter. There's something sacred in the early hours, when the world hasn't yet made demands, when your thoughts are still your own. I used to avoid mornings because they reminded me of everything I hadn't become. But now they remind me that I still can. I began each day with a simple ritual. Look in the mirror, hold my own stare, and ask the question that mattered more than any resolution or goal. Who do you want to be when this is over? Not someday, not next month, now. And more importantly, what do I need to burn to become him? I didn't answer out loud. I didn't need to. The answer wasn't in words. It was in action. And in silence, because silence, that's where the old self begs for rescue. It tells you you're being too hard on yourself, that you're tired, that this isn't sustainable. But that's when you know it's working. I started embracing the stillness, the resistance, the low hum of discomfort that never left. I trained with it, ate with it, slept beside it, not because I liked the pain, but because I knew the pain was the path. That's what the old version of me never understood. He thought strength was a mood, that you needed to feel ready to begin. But the truth is strength is built in the middle of resistance. In the mornings when your muscles scream, when your ego wants to hit snooze, when your heart asks for ease. and you give it discipline instead. Discipline over emotion, that became my compass. And every time I chose it, even in small, quiet ways, I could feel him slipping away. The version of me who waited, doubted, delayed, the man I used to be, was finally beginning to die, and that felt like living. They say momentum is a force. I think that's true, but so is resistance. After that first week, I felt like I was finally moving, like I had traction again. The morning rituals, the silence, the cold, every act of discomfort was sharpening me. I was starting to believe that maybe this time the change would stick, so I doubled down. I stripped everything comfortable from my life. No entertainment, no sugar, no long showers, no scrolling through my phone looking for nothing. I didn't just step out of my comfort zone. I lit the damn thing on fire, and for a while it worked. My focus tightened. My thoughts got clearer. I was sleeping less, but I felt more awake, more alive. There was a strange power in knowing I could command myself to suffer and actually follow through. I thought I'd discovered some kind of Stoic secret, like I'd hacked discipline, but soon that power started to twist. It started small, shorter texts to my girlfriend Lauren, skipping calls with my mom, getting annoyed with coworkers who didn't match my intensity. I chalked it up to growth. They just don't get it, I told myself. But deep down, I was slipping into a version of myself I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did. And that's what scared me. The old me hid behind comfort. This new me, he was hiding behind control. Every hour of my day was accounted for. If something didn't serve the mission, it didn't belong. Even joy started to feel suspicious. I started to believe that if something felt good, it must be weakness in disguise. And that's when Lauren finally said it. "You're not transforming," she told me one night over dinner. "You're disappearing." I wanted to argue, to say she didn't understand what I was trying to do, but I couldn't because she was right. I was becoming disciplined, yes, but I was also becoming distant rigid. Cold somewhere along the way, I'd started equating pain with progress, as if suffering alone could build character, as if virtue was a formula, subtract in all comfort, and what's left must be strength. But that's not Stoicism. That's avoidance dressed as virtue. It hit me a few days later when I visited Colt, an old mentor of mine from my time doing crisis work. Ex-military, tough as hell, lost a lot, seen more. He opened the door and I noticed something different. He looked calmer, softer somehow, but not in a weak way. In a centered way. We sat in his backyard drinking black coffee out of tin mugs. "You look wired," he said. Not judging, just observing. "You trying to outrun something again?" I told him everything, my 30-day vow, the cold showers, the burning of the old self. He nodded. "Let me talk." Then he said something I didn't expect. "Discipline without reflection is just another addiction that landed hard." He told me how after leaving the military, he built a life around control. Early mornings, clean diets, strict rules. And it worked for a while, until it didn't. I wasn't healing, he said. I was hiding in systems, trying to earn peace through punishment. That's when it clicked. I wasn't killing the old me. I was punishing him. I was swinging the pendulum so far in the other direction that I'd stopped growing. I was just replacing one kind of emotional armor with another. First, it was ease. Now it was intensity. But either way, I was avoiding what? Stillness. Because stillness forces you to face what structure can't fix. The parts of you that no schedule or cold shower can reach. I realized I was still afraid of who I might be without a mask. Whether that mask was laziness or perfection didn't matter. A mask is a mask. That night, I left Colt's place with a quiet mind and a heavy heart. I went home and sat in the dark for an hour. No music, no phone, no distractions. And I finally asked myself the question I'd been avoiding. Why are you doing this? Not the surface reason, the deep one. And when I sat with it, really sat with it, I realized something else. I wasn't just afraid of weakness. I was afraid of softness, of being open, of being seen. Because to be seen means you can be hurt. And I'd spent years convincing myself that numbness was protection. But numbness is just another prison. The Stoics didn't preach numbness. They preached clarity. balance, perspective. Marcus Aurelius still loved his family. Epictetus still laughed. Seneca wrote letters filled with warmth and tenderness. They didn't run from emotion, they trained it. I had confused emotion with weakness. But real stoicism isn't about never feeling. It's about never fleeing. That night, I wrote Lauren a letter. Not to apologize, but to tell her the truth that I wasn't trying to shut her out. I was just learning how to stop shutting myself down. And then I made a new vow. Not to kill my feelings, but to master them. To sit with discomfort, not just physical, but emotional. To choose honesty, not just effort. To pursue virtue, not just intensity. I realized I had to stop using hardship as a weapon and start using it as a teacher. Because suffering without reflection isn't strength, it's stubbornness. It's clinging to pain just to prove you can. That new vow, it felt different. It didn't feel like war. It felt like peace. Like I had finally stopped swinging at ghosts and started listening to what they were trying to say. I used to believe that stoicism was a solo mission. That once you found clarity, it was your job to hand it out like a map, draw the route, mark the dangers, push others to follow. So when my younger brother Jamie came to me, looking for direction, I didn't hesitate. Jamie had been clean for 8 months, still shaky but proud. He'd started working again, was going to group therapy, even opened a savings account. But I could tell something was bothering him. He was restless. He said he wanted to feel stronger, wanted to stop depending on external praise just to feel okay. I want what you're doing. He told me the routine, the clarity. I want that edge, and I gave it to him. I handed him the same framework. I'd built cold mornings clean, eating discomfort rituals, no social media, no entertainment. I told him the voice in his head wasn't real. That discipline over emotion would build his strength. At first, he seemed energized, motivated even. But 4 days in, he stopped responding to texts. On the 5th day, I got the call. Jamie had relapsed. He was found outside a liquor store unconscious. The paramedics said he was lucky. I sat in the hospital hallway staring at the fluorescent lights, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the nurse call my name. When I finally saw him, he was pale, eyes sunken, arms trembling. He wouldn't look at me. The guilt came fast and heavy. I had wanted to help him, but I forgot something vital. Not everyone's ready for the fire. I tried to pour my version of discipline into someone still learning how to breathe. I gave him the war plan, but not the shield. I handed him a sword, but didn't check if he was bleeding first. And that's the moment I realized stoicism without compassion can become cruelty. It's not the fault of the philosophy. It's the fault of the interpreter. I thought I was offering him a ladder, but I gave him a weight he wasn't strong enough to hold. That night, I drove home in silence. I didn't cry, not because I was strong, but because I was numb. I kept replaying his voice in my head. I want what you're doing, but he didn't need what I was doing. He needed patience. He needed time. And most of all, he needed someone who could just sit with him in the chaos, not push him toward order. I had confused strength with speed, and in doing so, I missed the real lesson. Strength isn't how fast you move, it's how still you can stay when someone else is breaking. I went back to Colt's place the next day. I told him everything. He nodded slow and steady, then said, "You thought your fire could light his path, but you forgot. Some people are still learning not to fear the flame." That hit deep. We sat in silence for a while. No lecture, no advice, just the sound of the wind dragging leaves across the deck. Then he added something I have never forgotten. Don't give people your pain as proof you've grown. Give them your presence. He was right. I wasn't wrong to want more for Jamie, but I was wrong to think my method was universal. Stoicism isn't a hammer. It's a compass. It guides, it doesn't strike. And I'd used it like a weapon, like a test. I sat on Colt's porch long after he went back inside, watching the wind move through the trees like it had nowhere else to be. And that stillness. That was my lesson, because sometimes being still beside someone is the bravest thing you can do. When I got home, I wrote Jamie a letter. I didn't try to explain. I didn't justify. I just told him the truth. That I had pushed too hard. That I had forgotten what it feels like to be unsure every second of the day that my strength wasn't better than his. It was just different. I told him I was proud of him, not for trying my path, but for having the courage to keep showing up for his. Then I folded the letter and left it at his door. The next morning, he texted one word, thanks. That was all I needed. Later that week, I returned to my notebook, the one where I used to write down all my inner lies and limits. This time, I added a new section, not for limits, but for lessons. At the top, I wrote, fire doesn't heal everyone. Sometimes shade saves lives. And below it, I wrote another truth. I needed to see, not everyone needs your intensity. Some just need your patience. I realized Stoicism isn't about becoming unbreakable. It's about understanding when to bend, when to pause, and when to let someone else breathe without trying to fix them. The weak version of myself used to try to rescue people by force. The rigid version thought silence was the answer to all wounds. But the real me, the one I'm learning to trust, he listens more, he moves slower. He understands that peace isn't always loud, and virtue isn't always visible. That's the version of me Jamie needs, and honestly, that's the version I need too. We don't always get it right the first time. Sometimes we offer strength when someone needs softness. Sometimes we share our solutions before we've earned the right to speak. But if we're listening, really listening, we learn. We adjust, we grow. And maybe that's what Stoicism really is. Not the absence of error, but the presence of reflection. A quiet willingness to learn from the damage we didn't mean to cause and to become better for it. Somewhere between guilt and clarity, I found stillness. Not the kind of stillness you chase with noise-canceling headphones or 10-minute meditations. I'm talking about the kind that meets you in the quiet corners of yourself when you stop running long enough to hear what your own mind has been trying to say. After Jamie's relapse, I pulled back. Not from the mission, but from the noise I'd mistaken for progress. I turned off my phone, took a few days off work. No texts, no updates, no mental checklists, just me, a journal, and the kind of silence that used to make my skin crawl. The first morning I woke up without an alarm. I didn't reach for my notebook. I didn't pace the kitchen like I usually did, listing off things to conquer. I just sat there at the edge of my bed, breathing, and it felt unfamiliar. It felt like surrender, but not the weak kind, the necessary kind. The kind the Stoics wrote about, the kind that clears away illusion. I walked outside barefoot. The sidewalk was cold, the sky still a dull blue. There was no audience, no challenge of the day, just air and space and the quiet realization that I didn't need to prove anything right now. That was the moment I realized I wasn't trying to kill the old self anymore. I was finally letting him die. There's a difference. Killing is violent. Reactive, it implies you're still fighting but letting something die that takes presence. That takes watching it fade without clinging, without rushing to replace it. The man I used to be. He was loud in my head, always narrating, always judging, always demanding movement. But this new version of me, he listened more than he spoke. That week I started journaling differently. Instead of writing down lies and crossing them out, I just asked questions. One question every morning. What do I no longer need? Not what to add, not what to improve, just what to release. And the answers surprised me. I wrote things like, I don't need to be impressive. I don't need to be in control. I don't need to have an opinion about everything. That last one hit hard because so much of who I had been was built on reacting, on proving I was in the know, that I had an angle, a take, a defense. But wisdom doesn't come from knowing everything. Wisdom comes from knowing what no longer deserves your energy. That week of stillness, I didn't feel powerful. I felt real, and that was better. One night I pulled out an old photo album. Tucked inside was a picture of me and my dad fishing on a lake when I was maybe 9. He looked tired, but he was smiling. I hadn't thought about him in months. My father died by suicide when I was 20. I never really let myself grieve. I turned it into a footnote, a cold fact in my backstory. But that night I cried, not loud, not messy, just quietly. like something long frozen had finally thawed. That's when I understood what Colt meant when he said presence is harder than pain, because pain can be controlled, managed, even weaponized, but presence that demands you be exactly where you are. No armor, no edits. That night, I wrote a letter to my father. I told him I missed him. I told him I'd spent years trying to prove I didn't need to feel that loss, that I was building myself into someone who couldn't be broken. But that was a lie. Strength isn't about not breaking. It's about not pretending you didn't. And for the first time, I didn't feel ashamed of that. The next morning, I went back to that same construction site where this all started, the one I once called a gravesite. I stood in the same place where I read the eulogy to my old self. But this time I didn't speak. I just listened. Listened to the wind. Listened to the space I used to fill with demands. And in that silence, something let go. The version of me who needed to dominate every moment was gone. Not buried, not exiled, just done. He had served his purpose. He got me through addiction, through shame, through the darkest parts of myself. But he wasn't meant to stay. And I was okay with that. I left the site without ceremony. No letter, no ritual, just a quiet step forward. One that didn't need to be dramatic to be final. That's what stillness teaches you. You don't need to shout your arrival. Sometimes your presence is the proof. Later that day, I sat with Lauren on the couch. She didn't ask me where I'd been. She just leaned into me, and I didn't pull away. That moment, quiet, simple, taught me more than all the cold showers and early alarms combined. Because when you finally learn to be still, you stop needing to be loud. You stop needing to prove anything. You start to see life not as something to conquer, but as something to carry one breath at a time. The final morning came without fanfare. No alarms, no to-do list, just sunlight creeping through the blinds and a quiet hum in my chest. Not of urgency, but presence. Day 30. I had circled it on my calendar like a finish line, expecting something dramatic. A surge of pride, some internal fireworks to declare victory. But instead, all I felt was stillness. Not emptiness, completion. I made coffee, no rush, no agenda. Just the familiar warmth of the cup in my hand and the quiet comfort of a day that didn't need to be controlled. I texted Lauren, asked if she wanted to grab breakfast. She replied with a smiley face and a, "Yes, I called Jamie too." Just to say, hey, no lecture, no check-in, just thinking of you. Then I drove across town to the Youth Recovery Center. A month ago, I'd agreed to give a talk, something about overcoming setbacks and building inner strength. At the time, I figured I'd turn my transformation into some kind of motivational message. But now I just wanted to tell the truth. The room wasn't large, maybe 30 chairs half full, a couple teens with crossed arms, a few parents, one tired-looking counselor in the back with a clipboard and coffee. I stepped up to the mic. My name flashed on the screen behind me. Cal Monroe, guest speaker. And for a second, the old nerves crept in. The pressure to sound impressive, to deliver something polished, something powerful, but I let that voice pass and I began. I used to think strength looked a certain way. I said hard edges, early mornings, cold showers, and tighter routines. I thought if I could just discipline myself enough, I'd finally become someone worth respecting. A few heads nodded, but I learned something over the past 30 days. Something I didn't expect. I paused. Not for effect, just to breathe. Discipline matters, but not if it becomes another form of self-punishment. Not if it builds walls around you instead of setting you free. I told them about the letter I wrote to my old self, the fire I tried to start, the way I thought I could force my way into a new identity. Then I told them about the silence, the letting go, the moments I didn't expect to matter that ended up changing everything. Like crying over a photo, like letting Lauren in, like watching my brother fall and choosing to stay close instead of stepping back. I thought the old me had to be killed with effort, I said, but in the end, he didn't need to be murdered. He just needed to be released. The room got quiet, real quiet. Not because they didn't understand, but because they did. I ended the talk with a line I'd written in my notebook just a few days earlier. The weak version of yourself isn't your enemy. He's your origin story. Just don't mistake him for your destiny. There was no applause. Not right away. Just a long, thoughtful silence. And honestly, that felt more honest than a standing ovation. Afterward, a kid, maybe 17, came up to me. "Hey," he said, eyes down. "Thanks for saying all that." Like not trying to sound like a superhero, just being real. I smiled. "Yeah, that's the point." Later that night, I drove back to the same construction site where it all began. The concrete still cracked. The scaffolding still rusting, but something about it felt different now. Not haunted, just unfinished like me. I didn't bring a letter this time. I didn't need one. I just stood there for a while, not to revisit the pain, but to acknowledge the path. The place where I once buried the man I used to be had become the place I gave thanks to the man I'd become. He wasn't louder. He wasn't tougher. He was just clearer, freer, and more honest. And maybe that's what real transformation looks like. Not fire, not fury, but the quiet confidence that comes when you stop running. The deep breath after the storm, the silence you're no longer afraid to sit in. Before I left, I knelt down and pressed my hand into the dirt. I whispered not to the wind, but to myself. "Thank you for surviving, but I'm taking it from here." No part of me hated the man I was. He did his job. He coped. He got through it. He carried me, even if it was messy, even if it was flawed. But I don't need him anymore. And that's not abandonment. That's evolution. When I got home, Lauren was on the couch flipping through a book. She looked up, smiled, and patted the seat beside her. I sat down, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to say something profound. I didn't feel like I had to prove I'd changed. She leaned into me, and I let myself lean back. No tension, no performance. Just presence, and in that moment, I knew something I hadn't known a month ago. You don't need to kill the weak version of yourself in battle. You just need to stop feeding him with fear. You need to stop mistaking him for you, and then he fades on his own like mist burning off in morning light. Because when you choose truth over image, virtue over validation, and presence over performance, something shifts, something frees you, and you begin again. Not as someone else, but as who you were always meant to be.